Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the 13th North American Leadership Forum. It is my pleasure and my honor to introduce to you Huw Thomas, long-term friend of CGLA's, and just basically a phenomenal person to speak to across different walks of life, specific to large infrastructure projects and specific to cutting-edge technology. Now, Huw's had 30 years plus experience, at Foster and Partners, working with large airports, large master plans globally, and everything from football stadiums to high-speed rail projects. He's, about 5 years ago, he ventured off on his own and became a serial entrepreneur, and started off, basically with projects that got the better part of data and how to monetize data for the improvement and efficiencies of infrastructure. So Huw's been involved in a data underground data center project, and more recently with Magway, which has actually received its seed funding and is now going into a Series A. I'm going to actually ask Huw to explain a little bit about Magway, because it's a pretty unique project in London. And more recently, he's founded Meld Energy with 4 partners, and he's really at the cutting edge of technology as it relates to the hydrogen value chain. So, Huw, it's thank you very much for being with us. You've been kind enough to also field some questions at the end. So please, any questions, just have them come our way, and we will bombard Huw at the end of his presentation. Thank you, Huw.
Thank you. Could I have the slides, please? Norman asked me to give a view from London. So first of all, I'd just like to say to Norman, we all wish you a very speedy recovery. We're very sad to hear about your illness, and we hope to see you bouncing back in your inimitable fashion very, very quickly. Next slide, please. Thanks for the introduction. Huw Thomas, chairman of Meld Energy, a group formed with 4 partners, really to look at the new opportunities for zero carbon development and what that might mean, not only from the energy perspective, but broader economic perspective and impact on communities. Next slide, please. Here in London, we're looking at net zero energy production in the context of our climate commitments, and that's a commitment we've got enshrined in law that we will be net zero in this country by 2050, and that is audited by the Commission for Climate Change, who produce regular reports looking at how we're performing in terms of reducing our emissions, how we're adapting to the impacts of climate change, and then making recommendations that the government has to react to and has to put policy in place to actually bring about those changes. And a key part of their recommendations are the move to a hydrogen economy, developing a hydrogen strategy, particularly for transport and for high heat intensity industries. Next slide, please. Everyone's going to have to say this, we're unique, and all of the presentations before, they've come from a particular perspective of where someone is based, the project they have, the geography they're in, the environment they're in, and the UK is no different. It's unique. It's an island, it's surrounded by water, it has a very long coastline, and it's got a lot of wind. And we have concentrated energy demand, so you can see when all the lights are on, where we're consuming that energy. But we've got phenomenal natural resource in the wind regime that we have. Next slide, please. So how are we going to make best use of that? And the government has come forward with a number of strategies. Key is a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and a really big policy bet here that we can use very early investment in green technologies to give us an edge globally in terms of those emerging markets. A commitment now to achieve 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by the end of this decade. a number of clusters for carbon capture sequestration, 5 gigawatts of hydrogen production capacity in that timescale, and a very hard commitment to phasing out the sale of internal combustion engines, diesel and petrol cars and vans. And then the revolution we're anticipating in terms of heat pumps, which I just think is an extraordinary number. 600,000 heat pumps installed annually by 2028, only 7 years from now. These are extraordinary commitments we've made, and we're just starting to gear up to be able to deliver on them. Next, please. The pressure the government's bringing to bear is supported by money, and in the autumn statement, the budget the Chancellor released today, there's even more money coming forwards, and that's largely aligned with our hosting of COP26. I'm up in Glasgow on Sunday for the next 2 weeks, and hopefully that's going to be a phenomenal event, and we're going to be able to bring people together and really deliver on the sorts of commitments that we believe need to be made globally to achieve climate reduction targets. But the hydrogen strategy we have here in the UK, it has, from a UK perspective, substantive money behind it, and some commitments that industry is going to have to decarbonize, and some targets, but also targets for production of hydrogen. Next slide, please. They're backed up by a roadmap, and like many of the presentations that were given earlier, carbon capture, utilization, and storage are part of the early steps. Really ramping up our hydrogen production capabilities, looking at, but no firm decision on this, looking at whether we can put hydrogen into the gas grid and how that has a role in terms of domestic heating, but a very strong focus on industrial. All boilers to be hydrogen ready by 2025, so that if we go that route, we're not investing in technology that won't be usable, and then really starting to ramp up that production of hydrogen through 2030, so that by 2050, low carbon electricity, hydrogen, bioenergy provide all of the UK's energy needs. Next slide, please. I say all that, and I say it to a largely American audience, and I have to say something about scale, because we're tiny. So we can do all these things as a country. Obviously, it's a lot harder in America to think in that more holistic way, but you have the advantage that you can begin to tackle these questions in lots of different locations, lots of different geographies, with lots of different responses. You're so much bigger than us in so many ways. But we've set some pretty bold targets. Our Prime Minister, he said that Britain aims to be the Saudi Arabia of wind. And in terms of hydrogen, we wish to be the Qatar of hydrogen. So a very, very small country with an enormous reach. And that's a glorious aspiration, to be here as an energy developer with that out there as an opportunity for us to build into. Next slide, please. And just summing up, I mean, you've heard so much about this, President Biden's commitment to reducing the cost of hydrogen. And that's the real game changer that will lead to the whole-scale adoption, we believe, of hydrogen. Next slide, please. I come a little closer to your shores because we did some work for the IFC in Costa Rica, looking at the green hydrogen opportunities. Next slide, please. Costa Rica, by the end of this year, it'll be 100% green energy, renewable energy, largely hydro and wind, but with a lot more production capacity than they use. So the exam question the IFC set was, could that energy be used to produce hydrogen, and what might the impact be? Next slide, please. So looking at the scale of the renewable generation opportunity, how that could be used through electrolysis to produce hydrogen into the domestic transport sector, and measuring that across the country, and looking at how that could be used, what the capacity was, and reaching the conclusion that you weren't going to use all you could produce, but there was an extraordinary opportunity to use a different energy vector. And that's where we've really got excited by green ammonia and the potential for green ammonia to lead into an export commodity, an export fuel, but also for direct use, particularly in maritime. Next slide, please. So the studies looking at cost of hydrogen production, use in the domestic market, and then the opportunity, particularly with ammonia, for the domestic market, fertilizers, shipping, and then for export. And that, we think, is something that is going to grow very, very strongly in the coming years. Next slide, please. So the UK, unique geography. It's a patchwork of opportunities. There's some very big projects going on in the UK, but what we're particularly focused on is the smaller ones. So next slide, please. And zero carbon Humber, we're doing some work in Humber looking at creating a green hydrogen production, but that's in the context of very large offshore wind. The highest production of carbon dioxide from industry anywhere in the UK in this region, and a real opportunity to see whether hydrogen can be fed into those industries to help decarbonise them. So this is a regional example of projects working with the city government and the regional governments and bringing industry in at that regional level to produce a series of projects aiming at a zero carbon target. Next slide, please. We heard mention of small modular reactors earlier, but we're working in a number of locations where there are past nuclear sites which are ideally suited to small modular reactions, and Rolls-Royce has been pioneering this. And one of the really interesting things about small modular is being able to use the heat as well as the baseload electricity, because the heat can actually improve quite dramatically the efficiencies of the electrolyzer. And what we've come to understand, from all our research and our modelling, is that utilisation of electrolyzers is key to the cost per kilogram. Next slide, please. Very interesting project. We've been up in Scotland talking to the Orkneys. They're something which is very much community-led. A series of islands looking at how they can use renewables and create distributed energy production, and using hydrogen as an energy vector into shipping and into local industries, and how that starts to change the economic dynamic. So again, a very interesting project to look at. Next slide, please. And finally, with West Virginia, part of the program, we started talking to a group in Wales, Idris, and this is an example of one of the projects they're looking at, which is using old coal mines, open cast, for pump storage, and using that opportunity to create a stable base load, marrying renewables with pump storage into electrolysis and hydrogen, particularly when it's close to the coast, because we're seeing an awful lot of opportunity with coastal distribution of ammonia and hydrogen. Next slide, please. And with that coastline, and almost 4,000 ports and harbours around the UK, largely established, most of them with some form of industrial activity, close to an awful lot of brownfield sites around that coastline. You're beginning in this image, as the sun sets on that old industrial port activity, you're starting to see the wind turbines appear, and the opportunity for ports to think differently. Next slide, please. And I get Lloyd's Register newsletter every morning, and over the last certainly 6 months, I've been seeing the uptick in mention of hydrogen and ammonia. And this is literally from this morning's newsletter, all of them looking at hydrogen and ammonia. And here, very much from Asia, but the investment in new vessels, particularly tri-fuel vessels that could take ammonia, really, we think, going to be a game changer in terms of how maritime starts to respond to net zero. Next slide, please. And this is an image of a port in the UK, primarily focused on shipping out cars. We're looking at some projects around the port. What's very interesting about these ships is that the cars they're transporting, as they become electric, they get an awful lot heavier. So those vessels, there are umpteen hulls being set down all over the world for new car carriers, and they are all tri-fuel, or they're moving towards ammonia or clean fuel sources. So what are the shipping lines who are moving first? What are they carrying? Where are they going? And what's the opportunity for new bunkering is really what we're starting to focus on, and seeing how can you build that bunkering capacity with ports, and going to the hinterland to look for the energy generation. Next slide, please. So our business model is to have a cookie cutter approach, looking for electrolysis as a modular capacity. That's linked to power generation, could be from PV, linked to battery, could be from wind, could be from offshore wind, and then building up groupings so that you can link into an ammonia production facility through a Haber-Bosch hydrogen capture Haber-Bosch process to produce the ammonia. Ammonia then usable to decarbonize elements of fertilizer production, industrial uses, yes, but ammonia also as a new fuel vector. And then getting that as a series of modules linked in most cases to ports, so that we can begin to ship the energy, the new energy vector, hydrogen ammonia, that's produced around the coastline to industry, into transport, etc. And the final slide, please. So what we're looking for is commitment from industry. And we're certainly getting that, people asking for new energy sources, strong government leadership and policy, which we're getting now in really in spades. That's really coming through. Community support, and we're really starting to see that as communities get behind net zero and begin to understand the choices that need to be made. And then really innovation in terms of project finance and delivery. So there's a view from London, and thank you very much. I'll hand back. I don't know that we have time for questions, but that was a quick romp.
Huw, thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we do not have more time for questions. I've received 3 questions here, which I can send you offline and get you in touch with the people directly. We've received a few questions as well, asking to share your presentation as well as some of the others earlier today. So I just wanted to let everyone know that every single one of the presentations will be available on the forum site right after the Friday closing. So just bear with us and we'll get it all organized and you'll have access to all that. Huw, again, I can't thank you enough for that presentation. Those pictures, by the way, were beautiful. Very, 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 very picturesque. And again, join us for the rest of the forum. I appreciate your time, sir, and your long-term partnership with CGLA. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.